According to the Sumerian tablets, 445,000 years ago, creator gods, as they call it, came to Earth. The only inhabitants of Earth were wild and undomesticated animals, and early ancestors of man. These beings were called the Anunnaki, which means those who from heaven to earth came. The Anunnaki inhabited a distant orbiting planet called Nibiru, which only entered our solar system every 3,600 years. They describe Nibiru as many times the diameter of Earth and abundant with iron oxide, making its rivers and lakes appear red. Now, a side note about Nibiru. According to the tablets, Nibiru's atmosphere began to deteriorate and become a hostile place for life, and in order to restore it, the Anunnaki needed one important element for their atmosphere: gold. Now, here are a few interesting facts. There is proof that gold nanoparticles can be used to repair our damaged ozone. It shields radiation, which explains why NASA uses gold foils in their space stations. While NASA is currently aware of 8 official planets in our solar system, there has been much speculation about the wobbly orbit of 2 planets, which points to the likely gravitational pull of a very large mass, which has yet to be discovered. Now, detection of this mass traces back decades, but in October of 2017, NASA published an article called "The Super Earth That Came Home for Dinner," stating, "There are now 5 different lines of observational evidence pointing to the existence of Planet 9. If you were to remove this explanation and imagine Planet 9 does not exist, then you generate more problems than you solve." Clearly, there is potential of another planet yet to be discovered in our solar system. Now, when the Anunnaki arrived, they were capable of living lives that spanned hundreds of thousands of years. They created a mining settlement they called Eridug, Earth Station 1, in the Persian Gulf, under a leader named Enki. The tablets convey, after a kingship descended from heaven, it was in Eridug. These visitors were not alone. They brought another extraterrestrial race with them. They were called the Igigi, and they worked as their slaves. The Igigi were considered inferior. They served the Anunnaki by mining gold. As civilizations grew, the Igigi endured crushing labor. And these stories are consistent with Babylonian tablets from the 18th century BC. When the gods, manlike, bore the labor, carried the load, the gods' load was great, the toil grievous, the trouble excessive. The great Anunnaki made the Igigi undertake the toil. After many centuries, the Igigi rebelled, mistakenly believing they could overcome these oppressive masters. Their defeat almost completely annihilated their race, leaving the Anunnaki without a workforce. Unable to replace the Igigi, Nibiru's ruler, Anu, ordered his son Enki to genetically engineer a new slave race, one that was intelligent enough to perform complex work but still be subservient to the Anunnaki. His experiments are recounted in detail in Atrahasis. Many unique creatures were created. Enki finally successfully met his goal, and the result? A genetic hybrid between Earth's caveman, Homo erectus, and the Anunnaki themselves. This hybrid we call Homo sapiens. The tablets called first men the Adamu. In Hebrew, Adam means man. The Anunnaki put the Homo sapiens to work in the mines and elsewhere in Mesopotamia. The Semitic word avad, or worship, literally means work for. Hence, early men had no choice but to worship their gods. According to the pictographs and texts, these Anunnaki who we know lived many centuries, were giants compared to the Homo sapiens. Now, because their main purpose in life was to serve the Anunnaki, Homo sapiens were, in return, educated with social skills and academic affairs and technology. All this is abundantly clear in the tablets. The new human slaves were sterile, but as the demand for workforce increased, they were re-engineered so that they could reproduce. This later led to an overpopulation. So later, many humans were banished from the safety of their cities, giving rise to the story of the Garden of Eden and the story of banishment from paradise for procreating. As humans evolved to become more intelligent, some Anunnaki leaders bred with these humans. The children which resulted from these forbidden unions between races were called the Nephilim, or giants of old. Tablets say that these practices enraged Enlil, the Anu leader of that time, who was also the brother of Enki. Enlil wanted to ensure no human would ever rise to power and potentially rule Nibiru. Naturally, the interbreeding increased that risk, but it was beyond his control. Human populations increased over the following millennia, only to be met with a population control plan that nature had in store. During one of its 3,600-year cycles, Nibiru's orbit created havoc on the Sun and on Earth. Nibiru is also called the Destroyer in the Kolbrin, which is an ancient gospel found in Scotland that was omitted from biblical text, much like the Dead Sea Scrolls were. It reads, "Men forgot the days of the Destroyer. Only the wise know where it went, and that it shall return at the appointed time. The Destroyer, its color, bright and fierce and ever-changing, was an unstable appearance, a fierce body of flames." Though stating Nibiru usually passes without causing harm, the tablets describe one cataclysmic event which occurred when Nibiru neared Earth. It says, first, black spots appeared on the Sun's surface. The Earth's magnetic field became weaker, the temperature rose, and ice caps began melting. This event we call the deluge, or the Great Flood. It also reads, "For days before the day of the deluge, the earth was rumbling, groaning, as if with pain. For nights before the calamity struck, in the heavens, Nibiru as a glowing star was seen." Well, according to the tablets, Enlil saw the oncoming disaster as an opportunity to rid the planet of humans that he deemed unworthy. He returned to Nibiru, but many Anunnaki chose to stay, instead witnessing the flooding and the destruction on the planet from their celestial boats which circled the earth. It reads, "Then there was darkness in daytime, and at night the moon as though by a monster was swallowed. The earth began to shake by a force before unknown. It was agitated. In the glow of dawn, a black cloud arose from the horizon. The morning light turned to darkness. Then the sound of a rolling thunder boomed, and lightning lit the skies. On that day, on that unforgettable day, the deluge with a roar began." At that point, the South Pole's huge ice sheets collided and fell into the ocean. This would have created tsunamis everywhere, traveling north to the gold mines in Southeast Africa. The tidal wave continued north until it reached and submerged the city of Eden, one of the first Anunnaki settlements on Earth, now located somewhere at the bottom of today's Persian Gulf. Witnessing the cataclysm, Enki, who felt sympathy for his creations, instructed his chosen ones to build boats. Among these few humans was Zayasudra, we know as Noah, and his family. A great storm with heavy rains started. The tidal wave kept sweeping the earth for 7 days until it finally came to a halt. But the heavy rains continued for 40 more days and nights. The story of the deluge is recorded in almost every civilization on our planet. Core ice samples taken from Greenland and Antarctica illustrate that at the height of the last ice age, the sea levels were 425 feet lower than they are today. And, more importantly, there is a clear indication of a rapid sea rise. After the deluge, reconstruction of a new spaceport began. The text describes how the Anunnaki made their buildings according to the position of the stars. It reads, "Let the heart of the plane, the heavens, reflect." Once Enki to this agreed, and Leal from the skies of distances took measures. Indeed, the pyramids, now questioned to be much older than originally determined, and many other ancient monuments are, in fact, aligned to the stars. When the Anunnaki finally left Earth, their influence had reached every corner of the world, from Mesopotamia to India to South America. Before they left, they gifted humanity the Sumerian civilization, which was inexplicably advanced for its time, having made a sort of a sudden appearance as a mature and highly organized culture that came out of nowhere. The Anunnaki taught the Sumerians their way of life and established monarchs. Now here's where it gets interesting. The kings would act as their emissaries on Earth and rule the people according to ancient principles. Unbeknownst to man, royal bloodlines were genetically manipulated by the Anunnaki. This would in turn explain the strong aversion by nobility to interclass breeding. Some people speculate that the Anunnaki have deceptively managed to control the Earth through this selective breeding of nobility for centuries, millennia. Others speculate that, as the tablets indicate, Nibiru may once again come close to our planet, and then the Anunnaki will return and restore rule over the slave race they created. This would explain the secrecy around the Sumerian recorded history.
First of all, when you look at ancient texts and traditions all over the world, literally all over the world, you find very clear descriptions of an advanced race or races that we would call extraterrestrial, not of this planet, that came to this planet and brought this advanced knowledge a long, long time ago. Some of the most famous examples of this are what have become known as the Sumerian texts or tablets. They were found in what we now call Iraq in the last century, about 1850. There's thousands of them. And they've been translated by a number of people, most famously a guy called Zecharia Sitchin. People think he's the only one that's done it because of the publicity and stuff that he's got in his books, but many other people have done it and actually have come to a slightly different interpretation than him. But the common theme of all of them is this, that a group which the Sumerian tablets, which were buried around 2000 BC, something like that, that they talk about this group they call the Anunnaki. In Sumerian, those who from heaven to earth came, which is the basic translation, but those who came from the high place and down to the earth overall is the feel of it, the Anunnaki. And when it talks about these Anunnaki and the tablets and stuff, here's an example of just one of the so-called cylinder seals that were found among them, depicting various things. There are some remarkable points and areas of text and evidence that you can see. First of all, there is remarkable knowledge in these texts of planetary, solar system, universal astronomical knowledge that has only been confirmed in this century and sometimes even more recently. In the text, for instance, they describe what Uranus and Neptune look like in a way that's only been confirmed in literally the last few years. They depict the solar system with planets that have only been found in the last century and the 20th century. How did they do that? What they say is the knowledge was brought by this Anunnaki. But it's more than that, because it talks in some detail about how this Anunnaki interbred with humanity, creating a hybrid race. And you find this theme all over the world. You find it in Genesis, in the Bible, which is a rewrite, when you do the research, of the Sumerian stories. So we get the theme of the sons of God who interbred with the daughters of men. But when you take that back to the Hebrew, just one step, you find that that phrase, sons of God interbred with the daughters of men, actually says sons of the gods interbred with the daughters of men. And every time in the Old Testament you see the word God, it's translated from a word meaning gods. And it's clear to me that we have been misled and we've misunderstood the difference between the gods, symbolically extraterrestrials in the ancient world, and God, which is all consciousness, all energy, everything that exists. So these Sumerian tablets very much confirm this ancient race. Now, again, when you look at other cultures, you find the same stories in the ancient Hindu cultures, the Vedas, their ancient holy books. You find descriptions of the gods flying in flying machines, which we would call aeroplanes or UFOs or flying saucers, whatever. And when you take the common theme around the world, it's very clear that in the ancient world was a race or races of very, very high technological knowledge. And this was the knowledge that built the pyramids. This was the knowledge that built all those ancient structures which conventional history and archaeology simply cannot explain. Now, this area here of what we call the asteroid belt would seem to be very, very significant. If you take Zecharia Sitchin's translation of the Sumerian tablets, the detail of which I have a problem with, I must say, here and there, they talk about, according to his translation, that a planet called Nibiru, the planet of the crossing in his translation of the Sumerian, came into this solar system a vast, vast amount of time ago. And one of its moons collided with a planet that was between Jupiter and Mars, and that created the asteroid belt, which just happens to be between Jupiter and Mars. That's one interpretation of what happened, but there are others, and I've come across a scientist, a friend in America, who's been researching all this for 30 years, and he is convinced from a large amount of different evidence that actually something different happened, not least because at a major corporation he used to work for, they did a study, the physicists at that corporation, into what must have happened to the solar system, because when you look at the planets and how they spin and how fast they spin and all this stuff, it's very clear that some major, major disruption has happened in this solar system. It's affected not just the Earth, but also the other planets. It's a major cataclysm. And they came to the conclusion, which basically supports the theme of a guy called Immanuel Velikovsky in the 50s, who was ridiculed for saying that what we now call Venus went through this solar system, devastated Mars, and almost destroyed the Earth. But these physicists are actually supporting the basis of that. What they believe as a result of their research is that the planet we now call Jupiter came into this solar system not that long ago, remarkably, 7,000 years ago maybe, something like that. 4,800 BC was the date that I was given for the window of time that it happened. And it collided with a planet that was in that area, and devastation unfolded, and the asteroid belt was the result. They also suggested that a great chunk of Jupiter, which is a colossal planet, of course, broke off and careered through this solar system and devastated Mars. Interestingly, the probes to Mars have suggested that the landscape of Mars is no more than 10,000 years old. So something certainly happened there that devastated it. And came close enough to the Earth and was caught in the Earth's field for a while, did a couple of orbits, and that orbit, when you look at the scientific suggestion of what that would have caused, starts to confirm some incredible legends, traditions, and oral and written evidence from the ancient world all over the planet that there came what the Bible calls the Great Flood. One of the things that this would have done, this pass by what we now call Venus, is to have created a 10,000-foot tidal wave. Interestingly, in the pre-flood world, since then, agriculture as we know it began at heights above 10,000 feet. Quite obvious why that would have happened in the scenario we're talking about.